come into being.
All right, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting conscientious emergence. So this right here, this group of loose brush strokes is obviously a seated woman to me. We have a head, arm, upper arm, hand, knee, distorted foot, distorted leg and foot. So that will be the ground for the rest of the scene to develop. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of rough her in with some sort of loose, flowing line work. That's the idea. There we go.
In its crib. You are just playing and seeing and being the hallucinations. You have not yet begun to manipulate them. And by manipulate them, I mean in the same way that an infant eventually begins to manipulate language and to discover the grammar of it and to discover that it can be used for something, that it can in fact be used to communicate. And consistently in the DMT flash, these things, and by consistently I mean not only for myself, but other people report this, these autonomous self-transforming machine elves, or tykes as I call them, in order to have a technical term that is... The tykes do this. They are using sound to make objects, and in some cases the objects are then using sound to make objects. But they are urging that you attempt this, do this, do this. And in that situation, you can actually do this. And the puzzle of it is that it's so satisfying, because to the exterior observer, you have just made the descent into gibberish and are raising serious questions in your friends' minds about how long this should be allowed to go on without somebody, pushing some kind of button. In any case, though, I think that this is just under the surface in human organization. We know that beta-carbolines are produced endogenously in the brain, in the pineal gland. We know that DMT occurs in the human brain. We know that DMT reaches its most intense concentration in the brain in the circadian cycle around 3 and 4 in the morning, when the most intense dreaming is going on. And if you know anything about how evolution actually works, it isn't that a mutation occurs which is confers such radical advantage on its owner that type suddenly dominates. People imagine this is how it works. It doesn't work like that. The way it works is you have steady turnover of mutations of all sorts in a population, and it presumes steady ecosystem in which this is happening. If there's a sudden change in the ecosystem, a forest burned down, an atomic war, a sandbar where there had been a forest, something like that, then what has happened is the selective pressures have changed, and mutations which were previously in the population totally harmless and quenched in the previous situation, suddenly they assume fantastic dominance because of the new situation and just proliferate out wildly. And I think that modern society constitutes such a radical reorganizing of the human environment that we can expect to see different types of people coming to the fore, gaining dominance through the selective process. For instance, a way of thinking of that would be to think, let me see if I can think of a good example. I'm thinking of people who give massages, and what a bright future they have ahead of them, and what a not so bright future they had ahead of them 15 years ago. The shift in the capitalist environment to the stress on service industries, people who deliver an intangible product, has suddenly made massage a very hot and viable item, where before it was somewhat fringy. And so a person who has this ability goes from finding themselves relegated to the fringes of society to making a living, if they're good at it, comparable to a decent psychoanalyst, I would suppose. At least in Northern California, this is all so thoroughly blurred. So, I don't want to talk the full time. It's 8:30. These are some of the themes that circulate in my own mind at the moment, and I would be glad to entertain questions on them or talk about some of the other things. But if there are questions, I would love to wade in. Yeah.
Many of my trips, I talked to God. It was God for a long time. And God was funny, it was neat, it wasn't me, it was something else. Then a psychic teacher of mine said that was just a spirit guide. He demoted it. He was pissed about that for a while, but that was the way it was. And you have that it is a space being, something. And I'm kind of okay about that one too, but have you thought about this?
Oh, I've thought about it.
That model.
I guess the reason I reject all occult models, and people ask, am I talking about astral traveling? Am I talking about astral planes? Am I talking about guardian angels? And I reject all of that because it's so mundane. The main thing that impresses me about all this stuff is how other it is, how unearthly it is, how nothing, it's not a spirit guide. I sort of visualize a kind of Virgil figure as a spirit guide, as Virgil led Dante through paradise and hell. These things are so weird that the space being thing I sort of reached out toward because nobody knows what a space being would be capable of. It is very mercurial and very tricky, and it is to some degree linked to the dynamics of your own unconscious. For instance, for a long time, it was the disembodied space voice, which had this tremendously large picture of space and time, and man's place in it, and this cosmic view. That's what it seemed to have, the cosmic view. Recently I mentioned these Hindus. They said, what about Krishna? What about religion? And I said, you should ask the mushroom. So he put it to the mushroom, and he wrote down the answer. He said, what about religion? And the mushroom said, religions are like grains of sand tossed up on the beaches of the places of space and time. I am the ocean. Well, now, who said that? I mean, is that what kind of person says that? A spirit guide, or what is it? Other times, the mushroom is highly realized as a personality. I mean, I remember this one trip where it came on with this Rod Steiger trip, like in the pawnbroker, like someone who had been disturbed in the grass. And I said, what are you doing here? I say to the mushroom. It says, what am I doing here? I'm not doing anything here. It wasn't a bad neighborhood till the monkeys got out of control. I said, but so you're just sort of here? He says, and you're living here? He said, why are you living here? I said, well, you're a mushroom, you live cheap, that's all. It's just a low-rent section of the galaxy out here, not much action. Other times, it can be very cosmic. It can be steered. And this is a phenomenon that totally puzzles me, that many people have verified, which is you can give it a theme. Like you can say Art Deco, and this stuff will begin flowing toward you. Millions and millions and millions of cigarette lighters, ashtrays, glasses, dresses, all this stuff, all perfectly realized Art Deco, high Art Deco. And then you can just say, no, Hellenic Greece. And it does that. And then you can say, okay, do one I've never seen. And it can do that. And you say, okay, now make it weird. And it just, you say, okay, that's weird enough. And what is happening here, you know? I mean, orthodox evolutionary theory, if it can be extended to brain organization, would tell you that you're not supposed to have anything in your head that doesn't have a purpose, a survival purpose, a biological raison d'etre. And yet, vast amounts of imagery and information. And I've said, you know, in 20 minutes you see more art than the human species has produced in 15,000 years. Well, now, if that's true, what in the world is going on that Joe Blow can outdo Michelangelo and everybody else rolled into one, and that it's only 5 grams away? What is human history then, anyway, that we've taken all this time to do this thing? Why are our horizons of experience so limited if this is so immediately accessible? One more thing about the character of the presentation of the other. Maybe it's fresh in my mind, or maybe I just tell it because it's a funny story, but some of you must have seen Ghostbusters. You don't have to have seen Ghostbusters to appreciate this, but I had a trip this summer where I sort of tricked myself, and I took what I would have to describe as approaching too much. And about 30 minutes into it, I realized that it was a great deal more than I had thought, and I could see this thing coming toward me, which was like about 100 miles wide and 10 miles high, and it was just coming fast. And in fact, I only had time enough to lie down. It was coming that fast. And as I was lying there, I felt this hand on my shoulder, and a very dry, distant, but somewhat sexy female voice said, it was like a stewardess, said, "They say it helps if you close your eyes, cowboy." Yes. Yeah, sure.
Difficulty I have is trying to find a place to leap in dialogue with you because you cover so much territory. But one recurring thing that seems important is the meaning of your experience and what you seem to be doing with explaining it and putting it out there as a framework for understanding. It seems to me crucial that framework be there. I'm fortunate or unfortunate, I've worked with a number of people who take a wide variety of drugs, these lines we talk about, many of whom have taken, I think, sufficient doses of the hallucinogens that you took to be type to have encountered something transforming, but don't. And really close investigation, the best psychological work I can do, reveals no content of significance. So it's led me to believe, plus my own experience, that the framework you bring to the experiences is crucial. And so I'd like you to dialogue with me.
Yes, it's a puzzling question. You're saying, what about the people who it isn't like this for? I agree with you that it's something about what you bring to it, but on the other hand, I took LSD many, many times and found it puzzling, interesting, abreactive, brought up a lot of strange stuff about me, but I was never fond of it the way other people were. I always found it somewhat trying to do it, and rarely hallucinated. It was only when it was the first time I took mushrooms and I said, my God, this is something of a different order. So I don't know what to make of people who find it elusive, any more than I know what to make of people who come back and say, it was exactly like you said it was. That's puzzling too, you know. because of my riff and that sort of thing. The way I do it, it doesn't happen for me spontaneously, I might say. I may have discovered inadvertently, I have to invoke it, sort of. In fact, not sort of, I just invoke it, and I feel somewhat embarrassed to do that because it's such a weird thing to do. But I do, and I even speak to it and say, usually what I say is something like show, and I call it thing because our relationship is informal. And I say show thing, show what you know, show thing, and it will begin to show, and then I say what you show is beautiful thing, show more, and it's just like coaxing something out, but it never steps back. You know, once you get it coaxed out, it's there, and it is fully active. So I don't know what to make of people who don't get the connection at all. Dennis and I have discussed this, and it's possible. In fact, see, so little is known about all this, even hardware stuff that schools of pharmacology could find out if they only cared to think about these problems this way. It may be that there are shamanic families or receptors. You know, it's well known, for instance, that there's some chemical, I can't remember what it is, but that some people, 1 in 20, can detect this stuff 50,000 times diluted from what most people can detect it. It's just a test they do. Some people are 50,000 times more sensitive to this chemical than other people. And there is a great deal of biological individuality in people, even though this is not a heavily researched subject, because, for instance, our whole medical theories are all people are alike. You have a cold, penicillin, or something or other. The truth is, biological markers for individuality are very numerous and not well understood. And if my suggestion that these hallucinogens should be thought of as pheromones is true, then you would expect genetic variability and genetic differences in how they work to crop up. This is like the problem of alcoholism and its genetic component. You know, this is another drug where some people have a totally crazy relationship to alcohol. Other people can't understand it, and the thinking is it must be genetic. Well, there are probably relationships like that to these less studied and understood drugs as well. I don't know. Maybe it's that you have to be in a state of grace. Sure, follow them.
Which is the next stage of the generalizability of your experience for, you might say, human alternate thought. That this is the evolutionary challenge that will bring out the next, if you say, level of complexity to cope with growing technique, to use your term. It seems that what I would like to propose that it's you others, whatever selectivity that is there, interacting with and experience that is powerful. And for you, it is the truth to me hallucination, and that you are dealing with that experience with all your resources and creativity and making it into a new level of consciousness. But is it what I've been struggling with, having encountered these other people for whom it has no challenge of that, that they have something else. Maybe it's a flood or a tragedy in the family or something like that, or they're thunderstruck at a church or whatever it might be, and it changes their whole life course.
Well, are you asking, is it historically inevitable, or are people like myself trying to make it happen and it sort of hangs in the balance? I would like to think that it's inevitable, naturally. And so I do. It seems that way to me. I mean, it seems to me that what is happening in part of the culture crisis is that we are exploring all avenues out of this mess, and that this one will eventually have to be looked at. See, I read essay by Guy Davenport in a very interesting book called The Geography of the Imagination, and he made a point which I've sort of adapted and made my own because I think it's so important. He believes that the whole thing that's going on in the 20th century, from Auschwitz to LSD to punk rock to psychoanalysis to all of everything, is really an effort to come to terms with an archaic cultural model. In other words, let me explain that. At the close of the medieval period, when urban centers and mercantile capitalism and all these things were getting started, there was a tremendous crisis in European society, a tremendous lack of models.
All right, well, that gets her set in. And I'm seeing her turn into kind of a landscape. So these are going to be the gestural brushwork, or the gestural brushwork for the, that's the foundation of what will be a fairly detailed and involved painting. But I like the way it's starting. So that's it for the moment. Thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch podcasting with the Mushroom Mansion Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting, conscientious emergence.
Obsessed with classic